Hello everybody, this is Dr. Cole. It's Sunday afternoon, October 19th, and this will be the Week 2 message for Political Science 1013 Fall 2025, the second 8-week schedule. Okay everybody, this is our second message. We generally will be doing these on Sundays. The term began in the middle of the week, so we did one on Wednesday, I believe, for you all. Generally these will be going out once a week over the weekend. All right, everybody, what we have is our exam is coming up on the 28th. That is 1 week from Tuesday. It will cover Units 1 and 2. Unit 1 on participation we discussed in my earlier announcement, so I wanted to say a bit about Unit 2 on parties and pressure groups today, and that will pretty much take us through the class notes for the first exam. Now, next time, everyone, what I will do is I will briefly go over those 4 articles you've been asked to look at, that you're asked to look at online. I believe one of them is from the Wall Street Journal. Remember, everybody, you have instructions on accessing material from the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. So be sure you know where that information is and can register properly and set yourself up so you'll have access to that material that I will be assigning over the course of the term. So we will talk about those articles next time. Now, right after my announcements next week, the exam will be coming up on Tuesday. So I will want to go ahead and talk to you next time about Unit 3, which will be part of the material for the midterm exam. And we'll probably get started, start you on Unit 4 as well, because Unit 4, the notes are much longer than for Unit 3. Unit 3 is a relatively short unit on the media. Unit 4 is on the Constitution. So that will be the material for our midterm exam. So since our exam is coming up early in the week, not this week, but next week, we will want to get you started on the midterm exam material after we talk about those 4 articles you're asked to look at for exam 1 on the 28th. Now everybody, we're going to do our first discussion this week. It will be tomorrow and Tuesday, Monday and Tuesday, the 20th and 21st. We've asked you to look at an article about the killing of Charlie Kirk, which I'm afraid may have dire consequences for our system. So you're asked to look at that article by David French and express yourself on those very sad events. He died a quite gruesome death. Of course, he had his critics as well as his admirers, Charlie Kirk. So look at that article and see what you think. Remember, we're asking you to post twice over the course of 48 hours, Monday and Tuesday. Post initially and then post in response to at least one of your classmates. You may post more often if you like, but try to get in at least 2 posts. All right? Okay, so we'll do that tomorrow and Tuesday, the 20th and the 21st, and we have our exam coming up next week on the 28th. Now then, Unit 2 on parties and pressure groups. We begin with parties, and I think that takes up about 60% of these class notes, and then we finish up talking about pressure groups. Organizations that have something in common in that they try to influence and control the government. Okay. Political parties try to get explicit control over the government by running candidates for office belonging to one party or the other. The idea is to win the election and get control of the government. I talk about the student council or student government elections you might have been familiar with when you were in, say, elementary or secondary school. If we were doing this course over a whole semester, 16 weeks instead of 8, I might teach you a unit on political socialization. Those elections are part of your socialization, getting you accustomed to the idea of elections. But the thing about it is, with parties, we keep our elections from becoming just a contest among personalities, which is how you might have perceived the elections you were exposed to and might have taken part in school before you got to college. It turns out to be pretty much a popularity contest. But by having political parties, we provide some content to what the individual candidates stand for, rather than just the personalities of the individual candidates themselves. So, even if you don't know much about politics, if you have some idea of what the different political parties stand for, that way you can cast an informed vote, at least somewhat informed. They perform all kinds of functions, conflict resolution between the parties, and since we only have two, that means our parties are pretty diverse, and we have to settle conflicts within each party as well as between the two parties. So I talk about intra-party and inter-party conflict resolution. The organization of the government in Congress, for instance, we have majority and minority leadership, and each party wants to get control of the House of Representatives and the Senate, because what goes along with that is control of leadership positions such as Speaker of the House and all the committees and subcommittees. The chairs of all the committees and subcommittees in Congress will be from the majority party. So it's very important for them to try to win control of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Okay? And the organization of the Congress, both chambers, goes along those lines. Now, we talk a bit about the leading figures in each of the parties, the chairs of the RNC and the DNC, the national committees, the chairpersons, and the conventions that take place every 4 years, which are really the legislatures of the party, but they only happen for a few days once every 4 years. So that's the organization of the parties. Now, the question arises, very important, why only two major parties? And we try to stress to you that that's part of the rules of the game, the way we have set them up in our country. Okay. As you read through that material, you could have either single-member districts or a system of proportional representation, or some combination of the two somehow. But whichever way you go on that tends to dictate that you will have either a two-party system or a system in which you have more than two parties with important influence. So be sure to read through that material closely when we talk about the difference the rules of the game makes, okay, depending on whether you have single-member districts or a system of proportional representation. That will tend to give you either a two-party system or what we call a multi-party system. Okay, so be sure to look at that material carefully. Now, we talk quite a bit about these two parties that we have, the Democrats and the Republicans, going back to the 1930s. The character that they took on at that time, the kind of people that support each one of them, and changes that they may have gone through in the meantime. Okay. Now, we're accustomed to saying that the Republicans are the party of the haves and the Democrats the party of the have-nots, but that's become much more ambiguous over the past couple of decades. Okay. It's kind of complicated to try to figure out what the parties stand for and what kind of people support each party. I have a section in the class notes called The Parties in the 21st Century, What's at Stake? And you might try to look at that closely. It'll give you some idea what is dividing the two parties one from the other and what are the major issues between them. Okay? All right. Then pressure groups. Now, there are two major parties, but there are hundreds or perhaps thousands of pressure groups. There are organizations that are exclusively pressure groups. There are other organizations who engage in political influence activity in addition to other things that they may do. Okay, so there are lots and lots of organizations out there trying to exert influence in addition to the two major political parties. So, pressure groups, by and large, are acting in behalf of the interests of their members, and the membership may be quite narrow compared to the people who identify with one or the other of the two major political parties. Generally, the pressure group is trying to work for the interests of its members, very often the economic interests of its members, although there are some major pressure groups who claim to be working for something more than just the interests of their members. They would describe themselves as public interest groups. Now, there can be quite a bit of cynicism about that. Okay, but there are groups who describe themselves that way, and it's up to you, I suppose, to judge whether they really are working for the public interest. Now, we think of lobbying as corrupt. We used to refer to pressure groups as lobbies. The term kind of fell out of favor because there are many activities such groups engage in. But lobbying is certainly a very important one. But among political scientists, the term interest group or pressure group called on in favor of lobby. But lobbying is certainly an important aspect of what they do. And by lobbying, we mean directly meeting with and trying to influence public officials. At the federal level, we generally would think of lobbyists trying to influence members of Congress. Now, lobbying has the reputation of being corrupt. We think of money passing under the table and votes being bought and sold. And that kind of stuff does go on, but most lobbyists would say they are practicing an honorable profession. In fact, you could say the right to lobby is protected by the First Amendment, where it speaks of our right to assemble and petition the government. We might say we have the right to form pressure groups. They would say that most of what they do, the bulk of their work, is in the area of doing research and providing information to members of Congress. And it has to be reliable research and information, because you might think somebody would try to distort things to favor one side or the other, but then there's always another pressure group on the other side. So they are under pressure to provide reliable information, because they're asking members of Congress to rely on this information when they make statements, take positions, take votes on the floor of Congress. So if the information turns out not to be reliable, okay, then that lobbyist may fall out of favor. He may end up damaging the interests of a member if a member ends up depending on inaccurate or faulty information in some respect or another. It's worth noting, members employ staff, committees do, okay, subcommittees, and the House and Senate as a whole employ staff. And there's a lot of movement back and forth between congressional staff and pressure groups. We call that the Washington revolving door, because they're all involved in doing the same kind of work, research on behalf of the members that they work for. Okay? All right, so that's one phenomenon we see in Washington, D.C. Congressional staff and lobbyists are doing the same kind of work. So if you were working for a member and maybe that member loses the contest for re-election, you may end up working for a pressure group. It's worth noting that there's a great deal of similarity in the work that they all do. Congressional staff on the one hand and pressure groups on the other. And there's individual member staff, committee and subcommittee staff, and staff who work for the House of Representatives and the Senate as a whole. Now, we try to go through major categories of pressure groups, and there are all kinds. We try to mention the leading groups in each category, okay, although there are hundreds or even thousands of them, so we're really just scratching the surface and mentioning the biggest groups in each sector. The business sector, the labor sector, the agriculture sector, okay, the technology sector, okay, governments lobbying each other, individual governments, cities, states, or organizations of governors or mayors or of counties. Okay. Then in addition to that, there are all the so-called public interest groups, groups lobbying on one side or another of an issue, okay, but may not be clearly involve people's narrow economic interest, you might say. But it's fair to say that most lobbyists and most pressure groups in Washington are working on behalf of the economic interests of their members. Okay? All right. So that will do it for now, everybody. We will have our discussion tomorrow and Tuesday, the 20th and 21st. Then we'll be looking ahead to our exam on the 28th. And I will be talking to you next time about those articles you're asked to look at for the exam. And since the exam is coming up early in the week, we will want to get started on our material for exam 2, the midterm exam. That's going to consist of Unit 3 on the media and Unit 4 on the Constitution. So I hope you will take part in the discussion, and we'll be talking to you again about a week from now at this time.